Hey, this is Nathan Crooker. I'm the creator and producer of Isolation, and you are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to the Graveyard.
And welcome to another edition of the Graveyard Show podcast. I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, I hope all of you had a great Halloween. Did you get some treats? Maybe some of you had Halloween parties. Maybe others just watched a bunch of movies. We here at the Graveyard had a movie viewing. It was a film called Deathbed, The Bed That Eats People. A movie that I'd never seen before, surprisingly. Came out in 1977, and as someone said, this movie came out the same year as Star Wars. Now, if you've seen Deathbed, you get it, right? It's an interesting film, let's put it that way. Part horror movie, part art house film. It's incredibly strange. But if you're interested in checking it out, it is available out there to rent. I think I rented it off of Amazon. So it is available to get. And if you do see it, or if you have seen it, I would love to get your thoughts on the film as well. It's interesting, and yes, it is a bed that does actually eat people. But anyway, Halloween is now in the rearview mirror as we now head into the month of November. And of course, here in the United States, that means Thanksgiving towards the end of the month, which of course leads into Black Friday. Speaking of Black Friday, did you see the trailer for the new horror comedy film Black Friday? Well, it is out. The film stars Devon Sawa, Michael Jai White, and Bruce Campbell. Definitely check it out. It looks incredibly promising, and it looks like it's a lot of fun. If you watch the trailer, keep a lookout around the minute 30 mark for a cameo that pops in, which was very unexpected. Would love to get your thoughts on that as well. Speaking of which, you can reach me at the email address gyspodcast@gmail.com. That's gyspodcast@gmail.com, where you can send me your thoughts, comments, and if you're part of the horror community and you have something to promote, please do not hesitate to reach out as well. All right, well, as you heard at the top of the show, producer Nathan Crooker is going to be joining me in just a moment to talk about his new film, Isolation, that he not only produced, but also created the concept for this anthology film. So I'm going to get into that in just a minute. On the other side, I will talk to you about December, what you can expect from the Graveyard Show podcast, and what latest Graveyard Show classics you can expect to hear as well. But in the meantime, as you hear in the background, a new grave is being added. And when that happens, that means my guest is here, and it's time for me to get to work. Nathan Crooker is the producer and creator of the film Isolation, which is an anthology film that takes place many months into the future that is based around the current global pandemic. Isolation is currently available on VOD, and it's my pleasure to welcome Nathan to the Graveyard. Nathan, welcome to the show.
I'm very happy to be in the Graveyard with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, it is awesome having you here. I gave, obviously, a very brief summary of the film. The film is directed by 11 directors who tell 9 different stories. So tell me, how did you come up with the idea for the film?
So it was kind of out of necessity for not going mad during the pandemic, because I originally was supposed to do my first feature, and obviously because of what happened, the money got pulled. And I was speaking to a good friend of mine, Phil Arthur, who was the composer for the beginning and end credits for the movie. Been friends for years, and I was like, hey man, I think I just might, do a short just to, do something so I don't go crazy. And he's like, well, why don't you think bigger? Who knows how long we're going to be in this thing? And, you've got nothing but time. And one day I got out of the shower and I was like, you know what? I couldn't write a feature, in a couple of months that would be all that great. That would be, geared around shooting at the home during the pandemic. But I bet I could get a bunch of really talented filmmakers to write about a bunch of shorts. And together we could craft something that's like 5 to 15 minutes, you know? It's a little bit easier than trying to write 90 or so pages. So I called up a buddy of mine who I wanted to help produce, and I said, hey, I got this crazy idea. You want to do like an anthology shot around the world with this idea that, you know, there's a virus in the background of these stories about people being isolated and struggling to survive. And he's like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so then it just became finding the right directors to take on the project, which was one of the biggest challenges, to be honest, because I sort of had asked everyone to, they had to shoot on a 4K camera. They couldn't shoot on their phone. They couldn't shoot on Zoom. That they had to shoot within their lockdown. They had to shoot with the people that were in their lockdown. There was a lot of stipulations at the time. I think people might be forgetting just how sort of nerve-wracking and how much of the unknown was still out there during April of that year. It came down to me speaking to I probably spoke to about 30 to 40 people a day for about, I don't know, 2 months, whether it be on the phone, Facebook, Instagram, just reaching out to bigger directors too that I kind of idolized, that I actually got to speak with. Sadly, they weren't able to do it because they didn't have the gear, but that sort of that was the genesis of it. And finally, I started to pick away at it, finding, you know, I think Larry Fessenden came on first, and I kind of gave him the spiel. I'm like, this is the world I'm creating. Let's talk about the script. What are the ideas? And then, you know, slowly but surely, I found my other 11 directors. So that's kind of the genesis of it, if you will.
So anthology films can be tricky, especially when you have a theme that's kind of tied together. Was there a concern that you might have had either too many stories or maybe not even enough stories for the film?
Yeah, it was tough because, you know, you're asking somebody to put some trust. Nobody knew who anybody was. And I've met Larry before just because I'm a New Yorker, but, you know, everyone else, I've never met them. And we never met in real life until we actually had the screening a year and a half later at Fright Fest. So it was all through Zoom and phone calls. So, you know, the directors put their trust in someone they didn't know. I guess my IMDb page spoke enough that they could trust me. But I had reached out to a lot of people, and I was concerned we were going to have too many. That was my biggest concern. And then, you know, kind of broke my heart to be that I was going to have to pull some films from the actual, you know, from who I had asked, and I didn't want to upset anyone. But lo and behold, it all sort of like worked itself out. There were some that that sort of dropped out for their own reasons and have become like really successful shorts on their own. And there were others that, you know, really just didn't fit the vibe of our story, or sort of the, you know, they didn't gel well with the rest of the story. So a couple of them just had to go to the connective tissue was just too strange. So no, it was more, and then it just really became about like what order we put these in, so it feels, you know, like you're on this little bit of a roller coaster and you're not bored, or you're not like, you know, just to get too much thrown at you. Like, how do we spread this out so it feels like a really good variety of story, you know what I mean? So that it became less about like how many I had, and then it became more about like, okay, now what order do I put them in so that this is a really seamless film and you get the most bang for your buck.
I'm sure too, the time for each film, I mean, you're talking 9 movies, so you figure on average, if you're talking 10 minutes a movie, that's, you know, an hour and a half right off the top without, you know, any credits or anything else. Was there concern that maybe either the films would come in too short, or maybe they did come in too short, or maybe too long? How did you work that out in terms of timing each of the each of the segments?
Well, first off, I was like, look, everybody, this is you got 5 to 15 minutes. That's it. It's not, I guess it could be shorter, but I didn't really want it to be shorter. So I said the scripts need to be 5 to 15 minutes. So I had all the scripts prior, obviously, to anybody going to shoot. And we tailored those stories, and then we sort of tailored the page count, you know, minute a page. So I kind of knew going into it how long the film would be. Some of them, obviously, in the edit, they got a little bit bigger, and then we scaled them back. And some of the ones are a little bit longer. You know, some of the stories, you know, some stuff didn't work, some stuff did work, and others. So at the end of the day, I sort of knew how long it was going to be. and then I sort of let the actual films when they were finished sort of dictate that, So like I said, some of them we pulled back on because some stuff didn't work. Others that were shorter became a little bit longer because we wanted to let other things play out. But I always knew it would sort of live in this, like, the world that was in right now, like the 144 world or something like that. You know what I mean? Just because, we already knew that the page count and everything was there, and we had spoken about it. And like I said, I really wanted to give the directors a lot of room to play with their story. So, I kind of knew going into that. But yeah, there was a point where it was like, man, James and I were talking, we're like, man, this cannot be like 2.5, like no offense to ABC's of Death, but once you start watching something that's over like 2 hours, to me, I'm like, you've lost me. So I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, especially with anthology films, it's a very specific style of film, and yeah, it can get, if you're talking hour and 50, 2 hours with those, you kind of go, well, when are we ending here? I mean, how many more? Right. How many more do we have?
Yeah, each one feels like a new ending. You're like, in that movie that ends like 5 times, you're like, oh my God, I thought this was over. You don't want that. And that's the funny thing about our film is, we shot everything, and then Zach and I, he was the producer on Bobby Rowe's Pacific Northwest. We were talking about it, and it sort of ended a little ambiguously in the movie, which it still does. But that button that we added, which I won't give it away, but that came like months. It was all done. Like the movie was done, and it was color corrected and everything, scored. And we were talking about, and I don't know what, Zach brought something up, and then I had to go back to Bobby, and I said, hey man, I need you to do something. Let's all get on this phone call. So we crafted that sort of last bit, probably 12 months later. And
wow.
I don't want to give it away, but what I'm talking about.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this: you have a background as a director. Did you ever consider directing a story in this as well, or was producing it just a lot to undertake?
It pained me in many, many ways as the movie started to come in that I wasn't doing one. But I was best served as the producer. I wrote a script. I shot a bunch of stuff for it. And then, you're working with 11 different directors. Again, there's 9 stories, 11 directors, because two of them are teams, so they work together. But, I'm working on different time zones all over the world. And it became such a big undertaking that I was like, look, if I don't give this thing 120% as a producer, executive producer on this thing, I won't be able to sleep right. I won't be able to put this out knowing that I did my very, very best to make this film and give my attention to these directors and for the people that are paying to watch it, to get the most out of it. I was also trying to do a movie as well. So I sort of throttled back on that. I said, like, you know what? I'm best suited to produce this film, to make sure like everything goes off without a hitch, and that we get like the edits are the best, the stories are the best, and find those one of the big things that I had to do aside from working with the directors was sort of deal with the interstitials, the sort of those veins that creep across the map, and then sort of like you pop into the city names, and I went through many, many, many different houses to find someone to do those effects. So that was a process in and of itself. But yeah, there's a lot of, my mom's like, well, why didn't you do it? I was like, oh, please, it hurts, don't say that. But now I look at the movie, when we premiered at Fright Fest, and I have the directors there watching it and myself, and it's like, man, I know I've 100% made the right decision. You know what I mean? I'm like, I look at this as like, it's my baby. I made 11 new friends, and, together we came together and just made this insane film that, to me, the quality of the filmmaking, the quality of the way it looks, it's super high end. It's as if it wasn't shot during the pandemic. It's as if we shot it, pre-pandemic. And that's what I wanted. I want visuals that when you were watching that were like, not only these are incredible, but how did they do this? How did they, because a lot of that stuff was being shot on an iPhone or your like major Hollywood studios that, paid $1 bajillion to lock these people in and had cameras anyway. But, that was really something that I really wanted to push. So, anyway, yeah, as the producer, it was just me. That script, I don't know, maybe you'll see it. Maybe I'll rewrite it into a feature, or maybe I'll put it in someone else's anthology.
Well, did I notice it, or did I see that your name was on credits for editor as well for a couple of the?
Yeah.
So you took on editing on top of producing. That's a lot.
It was a lot. I mean, look, you're working with some people, it was hard. So a lot of things, like, there were there were a lot of effects in some of the movies that, all of a sudden, certain places the lockdown became a lot stricter, and the people that they couldn't get the files to certain people. So, I got the files and I had to go and figure that out, like, for them, and there was like times when, I had to do some re-edits on some of the movies. And I also had to edit the total film itself. So it really came down to me, how can I best help the directors in these stories? And that's what I was there for, So if I had to help with a edit on a story, like, okay, let's do it. If I had to find the effects house to create, to help with the burning of a leg or something like that, with the smoke in certain scenes or all this other stuff, it was something that, I had to take on, and we needed to finish these movies. And, it was a big undertaking for them in general. I mean, you're shooting, no matter, it's funny, because if you look at the credits of Isolation, it's like they're a quarter of a page long for each movie. Like, the names get repeated so often, and I don't think people realize just how hard it is to shoot a short film in general, let alone do it with 3 people or 4 people.
Oh, yeah. That way. Yeah, no, I know. I mean, I come from that world, and I remember just as a film student, getting out there and being like, oh yeah, I'm going to go shoot my, Super 8 movie. And it's like, I'm doing this with 2 people, but wait, this isn't fair. I need,
you're gonna do sound by yourself, and you
exactly
do the camera, and you got the acting, and it's like, it's insane.
It really is.
Some of them didn't have what do you want? Some of them didn't have sound, like Bobby and Pacific Northwest for the kids. They ADR'd the whole thing later with the kids.
Oh, wow. You know what? I didn't even catch that. That was really well done. Oh, wow. Well, I'm gonna get into a little bit about the movie without giving the stories away too much in a minute. Really quickly though, I mean, this film is a global movie. I mean, you have obviously a lot of the stories take place here in the United States, but you also have one in the UK, in London. You have one in Berlin. I mean, as far as logistically goes, when you were coming together and putting this together, did you have all the filmmakers on a Zoom call or on a video call at the same time, or how was that, putting that together when and reaching out to these people?
Well, we also had a couple other ones too. Like I said, like we had this guy named his name was Georgie, and he's from Georgia, and he was shooting this amazing script, and then he got his equipment taken away from him, so he couldn't finish his movie. And there was another one in Canada that some other stuff happened and it didn't pan out in that way. But there were certain filmmakers that I put in contact because they needed to speak with each other because of how their stories connected. But I kept everybody pretty separate for the majority of the time we did it. I literally James and I would just talk to them separately over Zoom or email or whatever, and then sometimes I would give out the email address of another person so that the 2 people could talk in the UK and in San Diego, so they could figure out what they wanted to do with the image or what they wanted to say about the film. Because I also you're allowing these directors and you're telling them, hey, put this in there to make it connect. And I wanted them to write the audio, the dialogue for how it would connect back to somewhere else. So I let them sort of talk about that. But they didn't, like I said, nobody met anybody. They were all on emails together, but nobody met anyone and nobody even saw the movie, because I was like, okay, now it's not coming out. Originally we were going to do the movie, shoot it, cut it, put it all out while we're still in lockdown. And then that didn't happen because you've got just James and I trying to finish a film alone. So it took longer. And the beauty of that was all of a sudden, boom, we get into Fright Fest. Boom, we get into Scream Fest. We're in iFi Horror, which was a godsend because we got to see it on the big screen. Everybody got to come and watch it and meet each other. And I'm telling you, they might have not met on the phone or spoken on Zoom, but the minute we were all in the same room, it's as if it was like getting back together with your high school buddies or your college friends. It was instantaneous. It was wild.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah,
and I'm sure too, when you're talking about, again, you're talking about people shooting it from different parts of the country as well as the world, and getting to see what everybody's different take is on it, even though you're reading the script. Just seeing that for me was the curious part, because it's like, it's like, oh, okay, well, I lived in New York, so okay, I got that, and I'm in LA. Okay, I've been to San Diego, so that's interesting, but it's different parts. So I was like, oh, I wonder what this take's going to be on this, and what this story is going to be, and how it's different. It really is interesting. And getting back to what we were just talking about as far as like shooting it, this really reminded me of that old school going out and making, a movie on your own. Is it the true definition of independent filmmaking? Because it's like, you get 10 people out there, it's like what Romero did, right? With The Night of the Living Dead. Let's go out and let's make a movie, and, there will be 8 of us, and you're going to do lighting, craft service, and, driving people, and you're going to be the star, you're going to be the grip, and you're going to be the, it's just like, and it gets done. It's amazing how that can work out.
Well, when you back yourself into a corner, as you know, I think we all do. I mean, it's in any sort of anything that we do. It's like we figure out how to do it, and sometimes it comes out. I think you get a lot more creative if you're a creative. It becomes a lot more creative. But again, like when you look at the film, you don't think about those things. But the UK movie, they didn't it was just Alex and Keir. They had no sound person. So what they did was they created a character that was this YouTube girl who shot herself, but she mic'd herself up because she's doing it for the show. But then she keeps the mic on the rest of the film because, something goes awry. She's not going to take it off because she's in the middle of this heated thing that's happening in the house. But that's how they got the audio. So, everybody was very creative in how they did things. And it's funny that you say, I'm so happy that you said when you saw the city names come up, what's going to happen next? Because that's all I wanted. That's all I wanted to have happen. When you saw, okay, what's this map? Where am I going? Boom, New York. Boom, Berlin. And then you're like, okay, how is this film going to play out? How is this story about a virus in the background of these stories of survival? How is that going to play out in the city? That is exactly why I did what I did, and I'm so glad they said it. I just want to bring that up. That makes me really happy.
Oh, that makes me happy too. Well, I've talked enough about making the movie. Let's get into the story, the movie itself. And again, I'm not going to give away spoilers, so people who haven't seen the movie, don't worry. We're not going to get too deep into this. So the first, yeah, exactly. I say you're not going to give it away either. So my first thought was, well, it wasn't my first thought, but when I saw that the each story had the cities, I was curious as to the decision to not have the story title for each one. But you did put them at the end. You showed what story title was for each city.
Right.
What was the decision behind doing that?
I thought it would connect it. I feel like if you were to, I wanted it to feel all as if it was all one film. Now, they all look different because people did shoot on different formats. I allowed them to shoot, different aspect ratios. But to me, the reason I did that was because, look, you go to different places. Every place looks different. People act different. We're seeing different things. So I felt like you've got the background. The connective tissue is all there, right? We're going to go into this new city. And that's because the movie starts with that opening card. It sort of sets the tone. We're in the future. There's a global pandemic. We're not calling it COVID. It's just a global pandemic that has made everybody self-isolate, and the world is it's leaning toward going post-apocalyptic, right? And by saying that, now we're going to go, and now you're asking me, and I can't even remember what it says. The last line is, in these different cities around the world or something. It says something like that. So, that sort of sets up, okay, we're going to be traveling around the world. We're going to go to these different cities. So you sort of expect it. And then you see New York come up. And I wanted to, when that movie ended, where am I going to go to next? What journey is this film going to take me on? And I don't think you would have gotten that if you saw the next movie, 5G. I really felt like it would pull you out of the story and really it wouldn't be seamless. You wouldn't be leaning in for what the next adventure that you're going to take on this journey would be. So, but at the end, obviously, all the filmmakers had names for their films, and I also, again, they worked so hard and did such. I just wanted to give them even more praise. So that sort of at the end was something James and I added later. That we thought would just kind of be fun for them to see, with, giving the name of the film and, the city that was in and sort of, the directors and the writers. So that was something we just kind of added later.
Well, I thought it was a really smart move, and I think it was a wise move because you're right. It didn't take you out of the film when you're watching it because that can be distracting. Again, anthology films, you kind of have to, it's very different than actual, doing a feature
film. The other
film.
thing too is like it's repetitive, right? So you're like, okay, next name, next name, next name. But I felt like when you're watching this, it's not. You're sort of like, okay, you're questioning what city am I going to go to. I feel like it gets you a little bit more excited for each one. You lean in, maybe San Diego was pretty cool, but where am I going to go to next? I just feel like, it really brings you in. Where if you don't see the next movie, you're like, okay, hey, you want to go grab me a thing of popcorn? I'll be right back.
And the thing that I really enjoyed about it as it was continuing was, you do say, look, there's a global pandemic. Obviously, we know, living through it still, COVID. But you don't say that it's COVID, which is smart. We obviously know that it is COVID or a COVID-like thing because we see some of the people who come down with the symptoms of what the virus is. But what I really enjoyed about it was that you kind of make it more about people than the actual virus and everything behind it. You don't get into the why it's happening per se, which is great. You get into more of the loneliness people go through, fear, panic, desperation, and even just, survival. And then, of course, you have some, characters who are looking into the conspiracy theories of what's going on. And even then, it's like, well, is it conspiracy? Is it not? What's really happening? Is it in their minds? Is it really happening? And, it's really interesting. But again, calling back to Night of the Living Dead, where, they don't explain why the ghouls have appeared per se. Right. Your film doesn't get into that. And I wanted to ask, was that a conscious decision to do originally? Or was that something that maybe over time you decided when the scripts are coming in, maybe we don't?
No, I was another direction. I was like, guys, let's not talk. I said, look, we always want to do this because I wanted to do something we could all remember, sort of during the pandemic. And again, there's so much of that film that's going to be a time capsule when, years from now when people watch it, which is another reason why it's so cool. But I was like, look, let's not mention COVID. Let's not do any of that. The idea is that this virus, whatever this thing is like you're saying, it's in the background and it's how it's affecting these people, these stories of so it's survival horror, right? So I think to mention it, everybody knows. There's no need to say it again. We don't need to beat a dead horse. So I just wanted that in the background. It sets the tone. Everybody around the world gets it, so we don't have to talk about it. And it affects everybody differently. So each story is going to affect everybody differently based on what they went through at that time, and also the filmmakers too. A lot of the stories came from fears that they had. When I was like, all right, what are we going to talk about? Bobby was scared that something might happen to his kids. There's Denny, the Dread, the third movie in, we spoke about it at great length, and she's like, it's making me nervous. What if people come up here and start breaking into houses, and what are we going to do? There was a real fear in some of those, and there's a real truth behind some of those stories. So, at the end of the day, we didn't. It just it took on a life of its own in a way sometimes. So I think it was best suited sort of the way it came out.
Definitely. Yeah. And when I look back at the first film, New York, we have our lead who's narrating this story. Right off the bat, one of the interesting things is that he starts talking about, who came up with the, with the time for how long to wash your hands or how long to quarantine, who came up with these times. Right. And to me, that just brings you right in immediately, right? Because it turns it into a real world thing as opposed to a survival horror film. Right.
Well, that's the other thing too. It's Larry, that's what I'm saying. Larry's film Fever, that's the first film, really sets everything up. Like what you're saying, it's sort of it's sort of a little bit of a cheeky film in a way, but he's setting up sort of what is this that we have to do, and then all of a sudden, this idea that we're all in this together. This is happening to everybody. And if you see in this film, if you think back on it, as we move forward in the film, the virus that we follow throughout the film, sort of in the background, that obviously affects the characters, it mutates every film. It mutates more and more and more and more and more. All right, so to the point where at the end, there was this. It can sort of call back to this idea that, remember when people were saying the sunlight can kill the virus?
Yep.
At one point in all this craziness or something like that. I won't give it away, but that's the reason why it's mutated in such a way that's what what happened to the people in the second to last film in Homebodies, it sort of harks back to that idea. And so much of what the filmmakers decided to write about, a lot of that stuff wasn't happening. There weren't any riots or any, stuff wasn't on fire in LA, when Denny made her movie. And then I remember her calling me up and she's like, oh my God, it's happening. You know what I mean? Or like, there were a lot of times that, and the same thing with the UK story. So a lot of the stuff that the filmmakers had already written and shot sort of came to fruition months and months later. So that was kind of interesting to see.
Wow. It's almost it was a prediction of what was to come.
Not to like give away like everything that happened. But,
yeah. Well, it was interesting you mentioned LA because when you see certain things happening, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, it's weird. It's almost like you're like, oh, some people like, you're thinking about even the 5G thing wasn't really a big deal when Andrew was doing it. When Cody Goodfellow and him spoke, and Cody loves conspiracy theories. He just loves them, and I think he was probably going down the rabbit hole on his own. But it wasn't a big deal. And then all of a sudden, I think people still believe that we have microchips in us. Do we have them? I don't know. Maybe we do. Maybe somebody else has listened to this conversation. But that stuff was already at the top of their minds already. So. I forget where we're going with that. But.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll move us along because I really wanted to talk about two of the stories, which is getting back to L.A., and I think it was Chicago. What's really interesting is that they kind of, especially the L.A. one, both main characters either say nothing throughout the story or very, very little. And it kind of reminded me of the classic Twilight Zone episode called The Invaders. It's where, it's where the woman is in a house and it's Agnes Moorehead's the star of the episode, and she doesn't speak at all. And she's cleaning her house and living in her house, and things are happening in it. And there are these like monsters. And of course, as only, the Twilight Zone can do, it always, flips it at the end. But when I saw that, I was like, wow, what a great callback to that. And even though I'm sure it probably wasn't purposeful, what a great option creatively, as well as making it, as well as production wise, right? Because now again, like you'd said, you don't have to worry about audio at that point. You could just shoot it. You do it all in post or most of it in post. And now you can move on.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those two stories, I think, in and of themselves are very strong in the way that they're told. Visually, they're very strong. And I think, they're also, especially the one in Chicago. I mean, that film to me is probably the most poignant one out of all of them, because it really, this idea of human touch, and especially at that point when we weren't allowed to see our friends or our parents or anything, this idea that, like, are we ever really going to be able to get back out there without, having to wear these gloves or these masks? When are we able to, like, a hug becomes something so important, or like brushing up with someone that's so important? I remember James and I got Chicago back, and the fact that there is no dialogue and you have to sit there and think about it and watch this guy as he, like, slowly, I wouldn't say it's a descent into madness, but he slowly starts to unravels even more and more, because all he wants is somebody in his, like, he just wants a partner, someone, anyone, to be there with him. And I think that also the story with the dread being alone in that house and having no one to talk to, they leave themselves to want to have no dialogue. And I think that's what sort of, I'm sure that's why they built it around there, but it was like you're saying, something like that is purposeful for a reason. And I think, whether you like those or not in the anthology, they resonate with a lot of people. And I think, had they added dialogue, I don't think the stories would have been as strong.
I agree. Yeah, I think that's why it works so well, because you could see why you could see somebody saying, how can we shoot this without getting too bogged down production wise, but how can we do it too that makes sense and works for the film? And for both of them, it works really, really well. To me, the heartbreaking story, the hard one to watch was Seattle, because you got the two small children living on their own, and the mom has passed, the dad is out looking for help. I mean, the kids are great in that. That must have been pretty intense when you got that script.
It was wild. I mean, well, first of all, I was thinking, because Bobby's kids are like, I'm going to get this wrong, he's going to tell me, but they're like, I think Bodie's like 4 and Sonny's like 7 or something. they're young. They're really young.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah.
you know, being like, I mean, their dad acts, and you know, he's also a great director. You know, the houses October built 1 and 2, and yada yada yada. But like, my main thing was, are you going to be able to do this with the kids? You know, because Bobby's script was 15 pages. You've seen the movie. It's exactly like the script. There's a lot of action. These kids are doing a lot. I mean, they have to sell that story. And I said to him, I said, have they been in anything before? He's like, nah. I'm like, all right, let's see what happens. You know, but as Bobby will tell you, it was a struggle because his film, and he's going to be upset that he isn't here to talk about it, but because he made that movie and you saw that it's the lost, like the parents have gone, they're both gone. It's these kids alone. He tells it a little, harks back to Lord of the Flies is what he says. Like, what are these, you know, that and sort of that story, that's where it kind of came from. But what Bobby had to do was shoot a completely different ending so the kids could watch it. Where like, mommy wakes back up again because like daddy comes home and kisses her, and like there's this lightsaber fight in the woods, and like there's something else that has to do with like Harry Potter. He shot all these other scenes. And then obviously there's a couple of things in there where, you know, they're seeing dead bodies. Obviously they weren't in that shot or around that shot, so that's gone. It's replaced with like a lightsaber fight and like all this other stuff. I haven't seen this movie yet, but I think like that's probably in and on its own. When we get the Blu-ray out with the extras, it has to be on there because he had to show that to them. Because I was talking to the kids on the red carpet, and they were like, you know, talking about the version that they saw, and it was not a version that we see in the film.
Oh, those kids are so adorable. I'm watching this. I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, can I get through this one? This is going to be a tough one because they're just so adorable. They're so good. They really, it's a really good one. Home. Yeah, they really did. And I love how, and again, I'm not going to give it away. I love how Berlin ties everything up. And again, you have certain callbacks and things, and it was like, oh, okay, I get it. And it's really well done. And then the thing too. And then it ends. That's what I love. It's like, it's just like, boom. Okay, we've told it. Here it is. We're done. And I love that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's no need to. I don't know. I just you know, the thing with that too is, again, like I was telling you before, that button that happened at the end was sort of a combination of a lot of things that just happened. Like, you know, it was Bobby seeing Christian's movie, Comfort Zone, which takes place in Berlin, is Bobby seeing that film, and then he was back at the Whale, and he saw something at the, and he shot that scene, the last scene of his film, and he was like, look, we got to tie this together somehow, man. You know, and that's kind of where we came up again with that end button with that ends the movie. This is like, people are listening to be like, what is this guy talking about? It makes no sense. You're going to go watch the film because I can't give it away, because it is kind of a fun, that's the last thing I want to do is like give away that one little moment. Yeah. It's definitely fun and it's worth it.
Yeah, it definitely is. It was one of those things where it's like, oh, it's over. Oh, wait. Oh, okay. And then it ends.
You hang
and it's
in
perfect.
Black just a little bit longer, waiting for the title to come up, and then noises start to happen, and then we're back in this place, and you're like, what the hell is going on?
Yeah, and it's brilliant how the Berlin story is really brilliant and sad too, to a certain degree, because obviously but it's a perfect way to end the film. So,
and that's how it was going to end. It was just going to end like that, you know, because, you know, those last two shots are kind of epic, and it still leaves you guessing. You're like, oh, okay.
Yes.
And definitely, like, sort of, you know, what those shots say to you. This is so, like, enigmatic. But, you know, that's how it was going to end. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool.
Well,
but
again, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So then we bring it down to sort of, again, the human. We bring it back to really what the movie's all about.
Exactly.
Right? Which is people and the struggle to survive, and how are we going to do this? And I think that to me, I was like, once we figured that out and we dialed that in, I was like, oh wow, okay, this really, like, this is so satisfying. That to me was like, that cinched it.
Yeah. Well, I am going to say, as I was watching this movie, I'm like, there are two films that were made during the pandemic that I think would have, the pandemic, obviously, you know, everything, you know, made these films work because of what you had to do. But I think that if they were just made 5 years ago, both films are excellent. It's your film Isolation and the film Host. I think both movies have I think both of your movies, or I should say both of those movies, really, I think, show really talented filmmaking in times of restrictions and trying to make things work. So I think you and your all the directors and the crew and everybody did a hell of a job making this film. It really is a satisfying movie. I think it's a really good film, and I think it's going to be one of those movies that will hold over years. Which, you know, I really do. I think it's going to be out there for a very long time. Speaking of which, now it is currently available on VOD, but you did mention Blu-ray. Are there plans, or are there any sort of dates that people can look out for Blu-ray digital release?
Well, we're working on it right now. I'm working with Gravitas to have you can get a Blu-ray of it now on Prime if you'd like it. But we have, that was one of the other things I told all the filmmakers. I was like, let me add some more work to your plate. You know, you got 2 people in the movie. But I was like, you guys have to take stills and you have to shoot behind the scenes. Because we're all going to want to know how you did this. So there's so much of it. Larry has a great BTS. They all do this. So what I'm currently doing right now is sort of putting it all, like truncating it all together for each story, putting the commentary together. So it's going to be a minute, but we're definitely going to push through, because I think that is another, as even like, as horror lovers, the BTS to us, and sort of like, any more that we can get is always like, it's so satisfying. So I'm trying to put that together. I don't have a date when it's going to happen, but I'm working on it.
Well, let me know, and I'll definitely be happy to put that out there for all listeners of the program.
Appreciate that.
As far as social media goes, where can people follow you or the film?
So everybody can, the film, you can follow it at, my handles on Instagram is I am Crooker, or Nathan Crooker on Twitter. It doesn't really have its own homepage, but if you look up any of the directors' names, there's also a lot of BTS at ghostgangproductions.com, which is my company, and then I think that's about it. It doesn't have its own Instagram, and it doesn't have its own Twitter, which, yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. Sometimes...
all I care is I just want people to go watch the film, man.
Exactly. And that's why I wanted to have you on the program. The film is Isolation. It is available on VOD as of November 2nd. And I've been more than happy to keep all of you out there posted as to when this film will be available on digital and Blu-ray. Nathan, thank you so much for joining me on the program. I really appreciate it. Best of luck with this film, and I'd love to have you back on the program for your next film as well.
I would love to be back, and thanks so much for having me.
As I put this interview to rest, I want to again thank Nathan for joining me on the program. It was great having him on the show. I really did enjoy his film quite a bit, and I really recommend that you check this film out. It's really, really well done. Isolation available on VOD, and once I get word about when it's available on digital and on Blu-ray, I will be very happy to pass that information to you as well. It is not an easy project to put together. You think short films, what's the big deal? And you heard from Nathan as we were talking about it. There's a lot of logistics to making a 10-minute movie. There's a lot of logistics making a 2-minute movie. So check the film out. It's really well done, and I do not think you're going to be disappointed. And as I begin to close down the graveyard, I wanted to remind you about the month of December. So the month of December is sort of one of those months where I just kind of fade away for a while. We're all kind of looking at holiday season. So instead of having some guests on the program, what I'm going to be doing is unveiling a new form of year-end show called Voices from the Grave. And Voices from the Grave is going to be an original podcast, and it's going to be with original material. It's going to be with outtakes from some of the interviews that I've done this year. One question is actually going to be from this interview that you just heard that I'm holding for that show. You're going to be hearing from some of my guests, David Weiner, Robin Block, Ben Scrivens from Fright Rags, and a few other folks that I had on the program. So these are going to be outtakes from those interviews that did not make it on the original show. They will be, though, included in this upcoming podcast called The Graveyard Show Podcast, Voices from the Grave. As I did last year, I will include some outtakes of me being a dope as well. Very popular, apparently. Graveyard Show Classic podcast. I will be uploading in December. The second time Professor Christopher Sharrett joined me. His first interview that he did on the program is the last one that I uploaded, where we talked film criticism. On that program, we talked about the theory of the other with a capital O. On the next one that I'm going to be uploading, he and I discuss the theory of the couple with a capital C and how the couple relates to the horror film. And we're also going to talk about sexuality in the original Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Dracula, Nosferatu. And we also talk about scanners and what the scanners represent as well. So that will be uploaded very soon. Reminder, if you want to reach out to the program, the email address is gyspodcast@gmail.com. gyspodcast@gmail.com. Always look forward to your thoughts and comments. Speaking of which, the YouTube channel has been getting quite a response lately for comments, which I'm very happy to see. Mainly regarding my other program that I have on there that is a YouTube exclusive called Catacombs of Horror, which you can find on the Graveyard Show Podcast's YouTube channel. It is a video production. There are 2 episodes up there right now. The first one was What Best Represents 1980s Horror in 4 different categories, and it's a conversation between myself and the director of In Search of Darkness, David Weiner. We talk about what we think best represents each of the 4 categories. And then the second episode is my discussion about my favorite scenes from the vampire film Count Yorga Vampire. And that's been getting quite a bit of love lately, which I'm very happy to see. I think that film's a very underrated film, and I think it kind of gets lost sometimes out there. So hopefully this will kind of get some of you that haven't seen it to see it. I'm not saying it's a great movie. I'm not saying it's the best film by any means. So do not don't misunderstand that. But I think it's definitely a horror film that deserves a lot more credit and respect than I think that it gets. And Robert Quarry as Count Yorga is just fantastic. But I discussed my favorite scenes from that film, and I invite you to check that out. Again, Catacombs of Horror, which you can find on the Graveyard Show Podcast's YouTube channel. The Graveyard Show Podcast is also available as a podcast, of course, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts exist. And of course, if you know anyone who is a fan of horror, please invite them to enter the graveyard. New listeners and friends are always welcome. All right, my friends. Well, that's going to do it for me here in the month of November. For all my friends here in the United States, happy Thanksgiving. Have a great, happy, safe, fun time this year. And I look forward to seeing everyone around the world here again in December when Voices from the Grave is uploaded. All right, my friends, take care, stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon here inside my graveyard. And of course, as I like to always remind you, as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.